that we put out in providing care for those who can't provide for themselves, whatever way it is, then God says, I will reward and I will bless. And in fact, Matthew chapter 25 and verse 40, Jesus says that when we appear before the throne of God and Jesus separates the sheep from the goats, what will designate the sheep from the goats is whether or not we gave food to those who were hungry, and whether or not we provided clothing to the naked, and we visited those who were sick, and we went to those who were in prison. And you remember there that the sheep will ask Jesus, when did we do all these things to you, Jesus? And he says, well, you did it unto the least of these, my brethren. You've done it unto me. And that surely includes our aged parents, or those who are disabled. When you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me. And among the things that we have to provide for those who are terminally ill or in that type of situation is encouragement. And write down Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5, because the Apostle Paul quotes from the Old Testament where God says, I will never leave you, nor will I forsake you. And in the original language, he is as emphatic in the negative as he can be. I will never, no, not at all leave you, and I will never, not at all forsake you. And so when we are providing care or when we are receiving care, God says, I will always be with you. From the beginning of our lives until the end of our lives, God will be with us. Now, sometime I'm going to present a lesson on what happens when we die. And I want to have a sister lesson to that, dealing with end-of-life decisions. And I've already asked Dr. Casey, and we're going to get together, and he's going to present some thoughts from a medical doctor's perspective on what happens. How do doctors know when the body is dead? What do they look for when the body is dead? And I'm going to have him come teach this lesson with me at some point on what happens when we die. Paul says, don't forget that God is with you all the way to the end. Now turn over to 1 Timothy chapter 5. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, the Apostle Paul talks about a practice that went on during the first century, perhaps more so than we do today, and that is taking care of the widows from the church treasury. Now, apparently, the first century church had a list of people, widows that is, that they had on their list of support. Now, back in Acts chapter 6, the reason why God had the church appoint deacons in the first place was because there were Greek-speaking widows who were being overlooked, ignored in the daily distribution of food. It was a Jewish church, a Hebrew-speaking church, Aramaic-speaking church, but for those Greek-speaking widows, they have a little bit different culture than the Jewish widows. They were being overlooked. And so God had the apostles tell the church, you look out among yourselves and find men that we can appoint to be deacons. So that's where the role of deacons first begins, is looking after the widows. Now 1 Timothy chapter 5, beginning in verse 9. Notice that Paul says a widow is to be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, having been now the wife of one man, having a reputation for good works, and if she has brought up children, if she has shown hospitality to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has assisted those in distress, and if she's devoted herself to every good work. So in that list, Paul says, you look for a woman who has been a giver first. And if she doesn't have anybody who can take care of her, then she can be a recipient of the church's benevolence. Take care of your widows. Now the same thing, of course, would be true for the widowers. They are less numerous than widows, obviously, but it would be true for them as well. Now jump down to verse 16. Because in the interim passage, Paul says, for those widows who are young enough to get married, remarried, then they need to get married. They don't need to be a burden on the church because the church's finances need to be used for other things. So if a woman's young enough, she needs to find ways to take care of herself. And of course, if she has family, then they need to step in and take care of her. Look at verse 16. If any woman is a believer, has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. Widows indeed. That is, a widow who does not have anybody else in her family who can help provide for her. So what's Paul saying to you and me? He's saying we need to take care of our moms. And we need to take care of our dads. Now, in one sense, it might be unfortunate in the society that we live in where it's so easy to throw our loved ones into someplace, somewhere else, and let the government provide through Social Security or whatever, everything they need, and we can wash our hands of it. That has taken the burden, yes, of responsibility off our shoulders to put it on somebody else, and we pay to take care of them when we ought to be doing it ourselves. Paul says, take care of the widows and widowers. Take care of the elderly. One reason why we have jobs, Paul teaches in Ephesians chapter 4, is so that we can provide for our own needs and the needs of others. Well, as I was looking at this lesson, I came across a lot of suggestions on things that we can do to help. Now, putting a loved one in a nursing home, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not saying that's a sinful decision. But it does not alleviate us of our responsibilities to our loved one. That's what I want to emphasize. Now, what can we do? Help them with Social Security. Getting that paperwork through might be something we can do. Obviously, running errands, taking a loved one to doctor's appointments. And this may not even be a relative. It might be a next-door neighbor. When I think about the elderly that perished in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, I think to myself, there should not have been anyone who died in there. The people who were young enough and healthy enough to get out, they should have gotten out. Those who could not have gotten themselves out, they should have had a neighbor who called them up and said, let's get out of here, a hurricane is coming. The elderly that are out there in our neighborhood need to have somebody who looks after them. We need to call them up and say, can I do something for you? There should not have been any elderly who perished in Hurricane Katrina. Those who are young enough and strong enough and healthy enough to get them out should have gotten there. We need to run errands. Delivering meals. Now, I worked in another congregation who, in fact, once a week, different members of the congregation took a meal to one of the elderly and shut-in. To provide them with some fellowship, to provide them with some companionship, and to provide them with a good, hot meal. Emotional and spiritual support, advice on decision-making. They need help, oftentimes remembering the medicines that they need to take and when. You're probably familiar with that type of thing. If you're a caregiver, you need to take care of yourself as well. The Family Caregiver Alliance estimates that 30 to 40% of the caregivers of someone with Alzheimer's disease, 30 to 40%, suffer from depression themselves. Because it is so draining to provide care for someone like that. They suffer from hypertension. They suffer from depression. They suffer from heart disease, and so you've got to take care of yourself. You also have to remember that there are some things beyond your control. And then something else, and you've probably heard that Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, has Parkinson's disease. Life can also be rewarding despite that type of situation. Muhammad Ali recently, just a few years ago, picked up learning how to play a piano. The man beat the snot out of I don't know how many people down through the years. Now he's got Parkinson's disease, but he wants to learn to play the piano. Life can be rewarding despite such limitations. What about someone you know that is a caregiver? What are some things that you can do to help them? Maybe some things that you haven't thought of before. You can provide food for them. If they're sick with someone in the hospital, take them a sack of snacks that they can eat on while they're sitting there providing care for one of their loved ones. Something else that we can do to help those is to give a gas card Obviously, if you're running back and forth to hospitals and doctor's appointments, a prepaid card could come in handy. Don't ask what you can do. Just do it. If you see something that needs to be done, running the vacuum cleaner, doing the laundry, just do it. Sometimes people in this situation are so overwhelmed with things that they have to think about, they can't think about other things. And that's something that we can step in and help out on. And for those of us, certainly men, can do yard work for them. Step in, mow the grass, take care of the weeds, whatever it is. We can step in and we can help out. Don't ask, do. Well, then here's a list of things that those who have been caregivers want to share their wisdom with others who are not yet in that situation. It's okay to push, they say, sometimes. You might know far better what your loved one needs than he or she does, and it might be that you need to step in and make a decision. But now it can be tricky. Those of you who have had parents who have gotten to the age where they don't need to be driving anymore, sometimes it's tricky to try to get them to give up those car keys. And I know what that's like, because I went 2 years without having any car keys in my pocket when I lived in Romania. And when I got to the United States and I had that freedom now, I didn't want to give it up. So I understand what they're going through. So you have to be careful and take some wisdom. But what do? Pray. Pray for yourself and wisdom. Pray for the person you're providing for. Pray when you're happy, and yes, pray when you're angry. Pray when you're mad. Well, I worked in the congregation, and there was a woman who was a shut-in. And she was a retired teacher, and she had dreams through the years of doing a lot of traveling and seeing a lot of things when she retired. But then, I don't remember what it was, a stroke or something, but it practically made her incapacitated. And she struggled some with bitterness because her retirement dreams were not playing out. What do you do when you're mad and you're upset with life? Pray to God. If you cannot pour out your anger at life to God, who can you pour your anger out to? I think the imprecatory Psalms illustrates that very thing. Pour out all your emotions to God in prayer. And let God help you bear your burden. What can you do? Don't take personality changes personally. Again, people who suffer from Alzheimer's, their personality changes. And one woman said that as she saw her mom going through that and her mom was slowly slipping away from her mentally, she said it really helped her say goodbye to her mom. She was slowly moving away from her mom emotionally, psychologically, and you can't take those personality changes personally. Your love goes through changes as you say goodbye to your loved one. Don't take personality changes personally. Something else is don't divulge too much personal information that doesn't need to be shared. Sometimes it can get back around to the person and then they're upset with you because you told things that they didn't want you to tell. Protect, but not too much. Don't isolate someone. If your loved one is a people person, they need to continue being a people person. Again, Muhammad Ali's wife wanted to pull him away because she thought that his Parkinson's disease and the behaviors that come with that, she thought that it would be an embarrassment to him, because he had been such a strong, dynamic individual. And so when she took him to the place, to the exercise place, she tried to keep him separate, and he didn't like that. He was not nearly as happy as when she let him be with other people. He was a people person. So, protect, but not too much. Again, love goes through changes, and that can help you cope. And share the workload. If you have someone who is going through being a caregiver, a family member maybe who's being a caregiver and you're not there close by, you can share the workload, maybe by helping out financially. Maybe when you go to visit, you do all the running around and run the errands while you're there. Do the laundry and so forth. Keep in mind that we one day may be there.